Hi, I'm Pete McConville and welcome to Not So Obvious Watches for the last time of 2021. I want to go out in a high. I want to go out in a happy note. So I'm going to go out with a list of the things that catch my eye and make me want to buy a watch. I'm going to call them deal makers, but that's not entirely true. There's watches I'll buy that maybe not even have these criteria, but these are the ones which I'm really looking for and which are kind of catnip to me. One of the things that makes me feel good, especially coming after my deal breakers video, is that my list of deal makers, the things that make me love a watch, is substantially bigger. I had 5 deal breakers. I think I've got 17 deal makers on this list, and that makes me happy. I'm glad I've got that ratio. But anyway, all that said, after the intro, I'll get into what are my, however many there are, deal makers. Okay, so the first 2 are fairly generic, not about any particular watch, but about classes or types of watch. So the first is it's a watch that comes from a brand I identify with, that has a story that I want to make part of my own, whose narrative kind of fits with me, is a watch I'm going to be favorably disposed towards and I'm going to be looking at harder. Anyone who's watched the channel will know Breitling, Alpina, Mueller Glasuta, Seiko Prospex. These are brands I'm very interested in, but it doesn't stop there. There's also Fortis and Kadoki and Dawn Bluth and Zona and Gerard Perregaux and Ulysse Nardin. There's lots of other brands out there that I'm constantly watching to see where they go and if they have something for me, because I already know that this is a brand I've got time for. One of the things is that list is ever growing. I did a quick count one day. I think there's something like 600 to 650 active Swiss and German watch brands. I'm trying to always keep the doors open for new brands to come in. So my list of brands I'm interested in is not fixed, but I do kind of need to be interested in the brand. And if I'm interested in that brand, then its watches will definitely be catching my eye. Okay, the next sort of general characteristic of any watch I'm likely to be interested in is that it's a little obscure, it's a little off the beaten track. It's not an internet and certainly not an Instagram darling. I enjoy the idea of finding the diamond in the rough, the hidden gem. And so that's what I'm always kind of looking for. And if I can come across something which I think is broadly unappreciated, then that is kind of catnip to me. I'm going to want to go that way. Okay, so the next dozen or so things I'm about to mention are much more specific and are much more aesthetically driven. One of the things you're going to note is a lot of it is just about being visually interesting and having points of interest, points of attention that really grab me and keep me interested in a watch. So the first is I'm always going to prefer Arabics over indices. So any watch with Arabics is going to get my attention. Secondly, anything which has got applied as opposed to printed Arabics and or indices is going to get me. That the extra three-dimensionality, the extra facets, shapes, contours, the kinds of options that you get with indices, applied indices and especially applied Arabics, is always going to be something I'm attracted to. This next one might sound a bit weird, but I like handsets with a bit of substance. One of the places that a lot of brands go cheap and because they feel they can get away with it is in handsets. They'll go for really flat, simply finished, a little bit rough around the edges handsets. I love a handset that has a bit more heft in it. And it's always going to be visual because hands are always going to be as light as they can possibly be. But hands which have a bit more of three-dimensionality, maybe polished on one side, brushed on the other. Maybe if you look at it from the side, you get the impression of a bit of thickness. Those are things which I'm always going to be warm to. Simple, flat, sticky, cheap-looking hands, not for me. Okay, so sticking with the theme of maximizing the visual interest of a watch, and particularly the dial, is I really want date implementations that don't cost me anything. I love a date at like the 1:30 or the 4:30, tucked in between the indices, tucked in between the Arabics, so that I don't lose one of a very small number of visual reference points that a watch can give me. If a watchmaker can find a way to incorporate a date without costing me that kind of extra furniture, I'm going to be really interested in that watch. Okay, so this next one, I'm jumping a little sideways away from aesthetics into functionality, but just the order I wrote this one in. I love chronographs that don't have screw down pushes, that I can just activate the chronograph without having to sort of go through all this rigmarole of preparing for it. Just nice, simple pump style pushers perhaps, or any other kind of pusher. I don't care. As long as there's no screw locking feature, I'm in. They're pretty much the only chronographs, with one or two exceptions, that get my eye. Okay, moving back to aesthetics, I like interesting case designs. Twisted lugs, faceted side cases, mixtures of finishing, nice sharp transitions, generally no blobby cases. I like, edges, transitions, facets, that sort of thing. That's going to pique my interest and get me much more interested in your watch. Go the whole hog like a triptych case from Bremont, and that's really interesting to me. I'm very keen on something like that. Okay, I really like crystals that do fun things. Now that can be a number of different things. It could mean a super domed, bendy, distorting, carnival circus mirror kind of effect. Or it could be something that's absolutely pancake flat, but just slathered with AR so that it just vanishes. And when you look down into the dial, it looks like you're looking down a well into this, like there's nothing there. In a way, I don't care what you do with the crystal, as long as you do something with it. And if there's something really interesting in the crystal, then that's a watch I'm going to be really interested in. Another thing, sticking with dials, one thing I really love is seeing a bit of asymmetry, a bit of weirdness, a bit of playfulness, a bit of distortion, whatever. Just if the watchmaker has taken the opportunity to take that tiny little piece of real estate and create a sense of movement or excitement, that's always going to have an attraction for me. And it's going to be something I look at very hard. Sticking with that idea of sort of dynamism or movement, I like watches that have got a bit of complexity or ambiguity. If you look at the bezel and aren't quite sure if it's black or if it's blue, is it green or blue? Is the color orange or red? Depending on how I hold this, the indices could look like, or the Arabics could look like they're black or they've gone silver. Or it could be that it's a watch which blurs and blends genres or styles or looks. Anything that's not, sort of smacking me in the face and saying, this is what I am, but instead invites me to try and think more deeply about what it is and where it fits and how it would work, is certainly a watch which I'm going to be much more interested in. Okay, some really prosaic ones coming up now. Let's step away from the more artsy stuff I've been talking about. A GMT function will get me every time. A GMT or world timer or travel function in some way, that is guaranteed to get you on my radar. And so that's just something I really get excited about, and I am constantly searching for new travel watches. Okay, this next one runs counter to, according to one of the polls on my watch, on my channel, counter to 85% of you. I'm much more interested, I'm really excited by watches that give me the option of not buying it on a bracelet. I don't particularly like bracelets. I will wear them, but it's not my favorite. I'm generally a NATO textile, sailcloth, leather, rubber kind of guy rather than the metallics. So if I get the option of not having to invest, and I don't flip watches, so that whole idea of buy it on a bracelet because you get better resale is irrelevant to me as well. If I can save a couple of $100 by not buying a bracelet that I'm immediately going to take off, put in a box and put in storage, again, I will take that opportunity every time. Okay, I like watches with a bit of size, unless they're vintage watches. So if I'm buying a new watch, I generally want it to be 40 millimeters or above. I find anything else is just small. Everything gets cramped, everything gets crammed in. You can't put as much into the watch because there simply isn't as much space to put it in. I'll make an exception for a vintage watch because it will carry age and patina that will substitute for the complexity of that you could fit in an otherwise larger contemporary watch. Which brings me to my next point, which is I like vintage watches. Vintage watches will always grab my attention. I'm constantly looking and on the search for them. I restrict what I buy because owning lots of vintage watches can be difficult. But a vintage watch will always get my attention because it can substitute that the history and the patina and the little nicks and cuts and scratches that it brings. Its history, like quite often I've bought these watches from we'll say the wrong side of the Iron Curtain, and the idea that I'm owning a watch which saw the end of the Second World War from the east, which saw the Iron Curtain come down, which saw it lifted again, which saw the reunification of Germany, etc. That's a really interesting story for me, and that's always going to attract me. And finally, I can be really attracted by a watch that ditches every single one of the artistic pretensions I just went through. A super focused, no holds barred, no nonsense tool watch has a really addictive quality. I look at something like the Zin U1 and I just think, yes, that's a watch I have to have, and not any of the fancy mother of pearl ones or something. No, just the hardcore plain one. There's something about that which is just kind of magical, and that's something else that will attract me to a watch. Okay, so there's, I think, counting 17-ish odd things that will really attract me to a watch. I felt bad as I'm doing that because sometimes you almost drop into also talking about what you don't like. But in this case, when I say I don't like it, that doesn't mean it's a deal breaker. I own lots of watches that have slab sides. I own lots of watches that have printed indices. None of these things are mandatory. These are just the things that I really love, the things that really get my attention to a watch. What about you? What are the things which really catch your eye and say, this is a watch I'm going to pay more attention to and potentially put on my list? I'd love to know. Finish the year up with a list of the things we love to see. Anyway, I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches. See you later for the rest of 2021, and I look forward to joining you in 2022. Bye.